All right, well, I appreciate everybody staying late. It's been a lot of science today, so I will try to finish up, and Earl tells me that the reason everybody's still here is the Washington game doesn't start until 4. So I'm gonna have to be quick. So I always start my talks with just my personal connection. So I'm a scientist at JDRF. I'm responsible for overseeing our artificial pancreas work. I work in our New York City office with a team of over 20 scientists who oversee our funding. But my family also has a diabetes connection, as some of you may have seen these slides before. But this was when my brother, I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and Steve, my brother Steve, is next in line, was diagnosed with type 1. And I always show this slide because I think it highlights what many of you have faced. Bolt out of the blue, no experience with type 1 diabetes, not even knowing what type 1 diabetes is, and then your lives are kind of turned upside down. And that's how this was when my brother was diagnosed. And I always joke that you can tell my dad's a scientist. And here I am when I was diagnosed, about the age I was diagnosed, I was 13. And I always joke that if looking like this at 13 wasn't tough enough, add type 1 diabetes on top of it. Brutal. Kick me while I'm down. But it's just a way of saying that at JDRF, we're driving towards a cure. We're trying to advance the science in the meantime and deliver better treatments. And we feel the urgency. I can't wait to get there, as you all can't wait either. So just very quickly, why do we need better treatments? And I want to try to, Dr. Atkinson did some debunking of myths, and this is just a highlight. I'm going to make a couple points here about treatment of type 1 diabetes today and why we need better treatments. Dr. Greenbaum showed data from the exchange, the type 1 diabetes exchange. And if you look at A1Cs, and this is actually a little bit old. I hate to say it, but the data is even worse right now in 2014. But you look at the average A1Cs in the United States, 25,000 people in the United States, they're elevated. We are not getting there yet with today's treatments. And I'm sure a number of you have kids who fall in this bucket, and I was in this bucket at one point with diabetes. In adolescence and young adulthood, diabetes often gets deprioritized, and treatment gets deprioritized, and high blood sugar is an issue. And then hypoglycemia. Severe hypoglycemia is still a real risk. And I was just talking to Dr. Hirsch. She was asking about my brother who has had hypoglycemia issues. And he just had an incident when he was found in his car by the police and they had to punch out his window just this last month. DKA, still an issue in today's treatments. And then this is a comparison of the exchange in a group in Europe. And I just want to show you this data because one of the big myths out there is that people with diabetes could do better with today's treatments. They're just not trying hard enough. I'm sure people with type 1 are non-compliant. And this data is from the T1D exchange in a group in Europe. And you see there's high pump usage, 50% of this is kids in the exchange, and 74% here. Testing, blood sugar testing, 7 times and 8 times a day. And here are the A1Cs. So we know that people who are trying even really hard, it's still not easy. And I know I'm, like Dr. Greenbaum said, singing to the choir here. One of the other things, and Dr. Hirsch mentioned the JDRF CGM trial, is just to quantify what that means. What's an A1C of 7.5? One of the things that I found surprising at the JDRF trial is when you look at how much time you spend with high or low blood sugar with a given A1C. In this trial, we had CGM on people, and you can see that if you have an A1C, the kids had an A1C in the like 7.8 range. That is using CGM, this is the data, using CGM and pumps, 10 hours a day above 180. Those same kids spend about 60 minutes a day, every single day below 70. Similarly, adults, even using pumps and CGM, almost 7 hours a day above 180. So again, I know I'm singing to the choir here, but sometimes there's this myth out there that we're just not trying hard enough. And the bottom line is we need better tools. And that's what some of the work we're focused on artificial pancreas is about. So one of the other things that I like to show when I talk about artificial pancreas is a lot of parents come up to me and say, oh my God, nothing's changed since my child was diagnosed. It's so slow. Why does it take so long? So things do take time, but I've been showing kind of the evolution since my brother was diagnosed and I was diagnosed. This was the test kit that my brother used. In fact, this was an advanced test kit. Before that, he had to pee into a little vial and drop a fizzy tab in there. And Dr. Hirsch talked about SGLT2 inhibitors, but this was pre-blood glucose monitoring. So when we were diagnosed, and Dr. Hirsch is in this bucket as well, there wasn't blood sugar monitoring. It was glucose monitoring of urine. So that was pretty crude, obviously. Many of you have heard of the guillotine. This is the first Lancet machine that I used in my family. And I always say that this goes in the annals of sadistic industrial design. I mean, who would really do this? Some crazy person. But that was it. I mean, and we used this. And when I was diagnosed with these strips. I remember going to my mom and saying, you know, there's a problem here, and we did the test. And when we talk about, a lot of people say, oh, the CGM devices aren't accurate enough. Look here, when we were doing in increments of 40, 60 numbers, and you would wait for 2 minutes, or if you were high, you would wait for 3 minutes to get the color. And of course, when we would log these on our fridge, and my brother and I would always say, yeah, I think it's about 120. And we used to cut those strips in half. This is a real picture. This is the first insulin pump. It was never commercialized, but we have come past that. But this is the first commercial insulin pump, and I'm sure Dr. Hirsch remembers this, the auto syringe. And the investigators who worked on this initially, and kind of the first champions of insulin pump therapy, are still involved with our Artificial Pancreas Consortium, Drs. Bob Sherwin and Bill Tamberlane at Yale. And I was in Spokane the other day, and I was thinking of Adam Morrison, you know, the amazing Gonzaga player, and with type 1 diabetes. And one of the pictures that I don't have is Bill has a picture back from the early 80s with one of the kids in his clinic playing basketball. Bill's a big basketball player, with this pump on. And can you imagine? I mean, so we have advanced, even though people complain about their pumps. It's better than it was. And this is the first artificial pancreas system. And this system actually worked very, very well. It's from the 1970s. It's called the Biostator, made in Germany. And I always think this picture is funny because it looks like the person's dead. But it kind of gets to one of the core things that our team at JDRF, when we work with the companies and folks, is there needs to be good glucose control, but there needs to be quality of life. Obviously, I'm a big runner. You can't really run around, or you see the people at Microsoft playing soccer today, you know, carrying your Biostator, unless maybe you're the goalie, probably wouldn't be so great. This is just showing you kind of just a brief historical perspective and where we're trying to go with artificial pancreas technologies. So where are we with this project? And it's actually exciting times. First of all, this is a very, very impressive effort with an incredible amount of super smart people working on this project. This graph is all the different sites that are working on it, a number of academic institutions, which include really smart doctors, often very smart engineers, companies, other charities like the HELMSLEY Trust is a very, very important partner of ours here. FDA, I was at FDA on Monday, NIDDK, NIH, all these different companies. We have an amazing group here in Seattle, and I'll talk about some of that. A group that's spun out of Boeing called Dose Safety, working with Dr. Greenbaum and the team at the Benaroya Institute. So it's a huge effort to try to solve this problem and move these technologies along. Now, my message today is going to be, it's not a matter of if you're going to have an artificial pancreas in the next few years, it's just a matter of when. And really, there's really one debate going on within the field, and I'll weigh in on that, is what is that going to look like? And I published this roadmap a few years ago, gosh, it's 5 or 6 years ago now, which essentially said I think it's going to be an iterative, kind of more and more advanced systems. Now lately, some folks have been talking about jumping all the way to the end, which would be to have a multi-hormone, fully closed loop system. And should we skip all of these steps and just go for the gusto? I'm going to argue today that I think we are going to see a stepwise approach. The first step, I was with a family today who, and some of you are probably using that, the Veo, which is the low glucose suspend, is already available all around the world. The next step would be a system that predicts your blood sugar and turns it off, the pump off before you get there to try to minimize lows. That's approved in Europe, and the testing is going on at FDA for approval in the United States. And I'm going to go through each of these. Then the question is about dosing insulin and multi-hormone, and I'll talk about why I think it's probably going to happen in a stepwise manner. So what is the data? Well, the first data was with low glucose suspend pumps, and this is pretty not rocket science. The human body does not keep pumping out insulin if your blood sugar is low. Until these pumps were approved, you could be wearing a CGM, and the CGM could be telling you that your blood sugar was below 40, and the pump would continue to pump insulin into you. So Medtronic has commercialized this 530G, and the data is actually very good. Now, where we're going is moving to predictive low glucose suspend. We're funding a big study in Australia now, and the exciting thing here, Dr. Hood showed you a little data. His team at Stanford has been studying this. These predictive systems can reduce hypoglycemia depending on how you quantify it, the amount of minutes a day, the amount of events below 70, the amount of events below 55, anywhere from about 30 to 70 or 80% of hypo reduction automatically. And again, I think the important thing about these systems is it's twofold. Better blood sugar control, so less hypo. But the amazing thing, if you read about this Medtronic product here, is it doesn't alarm you. So one of the big things that Dr. Hood talked about is the burden, and do devices, add burden or remove burden? A lot of people who use CGM, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You get the alarms, but the double-edged sword is you get the alarms. I mean, they're waking you up, they're waking my wife up all the time. This system automatically does it and doesn't alarm you unless you really need to intervene. And this is Dr. Buckingham himself. And the data, you don't have to interpret this. You can just see the lines are different. And again, when you do predictive low glucose suspend, you can reduce a lot of lows. You can't reduce, if I were to go out and give myself 15 units of insulin and then not eat anything, that turning off the pump's not going to save me all the way. But overnight, when your blood sugar may be drifting down because you exercised or something, it does very, very well automatically. I think this is going to be a game-changing technology. And again, it's already in pivotal trials here at FDA in the United States. Nope, down. Now, the next big step is dosing insulin. Can we dose insulin automatically with today's sensors? One of the groups that we've been funding has been doing overnight control. And this is Roman Hovorka. He's a very, very smart mathematician at Cambridge in England. And this graph just shows you how much time the kids in his study spent below 70. Their target was between 72 and 144, and then time above 144. And what you can see is they dramatically reduced lows. In fact, they eliminated almost all the lows. They dramatically increased the time in 70 to 144, and they reduced high blood sugar. They're doing these studies. These studies now are happening totally in the real world. I was with the team in Cambridge about 2 months ago, and it was absolutely amazing. I was with a mom, and she got up and talked about her daughter who was participating in one of these trials, and she started getting emotional and crying about it because it was so powerful. And she described her daughter as difficult. She was a 14-year-old, and I think all 14-year-olds, or many, are difficult. She was in this system where she was wearing a sensor, this regular sensor, regular pump, and a handheld, a cell phone. And it was amazing because every single morning she would wake up with a perfect blood sugar and no lows. And she showed one graph to the group where her daughter went to bed at 3 a.m. She, at about 7:30 in the morning, while sleeping, her blood sugar went from about 100 to about 190, just from hormones. And the system just brought it back down, and she woke up at about 11:30 or noon. It's amazing because it's just talking about one of the big focuses now is these trials are happening in the real world, and they're working really, really well. This is a really great guy. His name is Boris Kovachev. He's an investigator at the University of Virginia, and he's very much a Boris. Whenever he answers the phone, he says, "Here is Boris." He's a very good friend. And he's doing some very sophisticated trials. Oh, and again, the control, these graphs, you don't have to interpret them just to see that when the people do the control themselves, the system outperforms them tremendously. Far fewer lows, far fewer highs. So you'll see the graphs. These lighter graphs are the spread of blood sugar when you're doing it yourself. And see how tight the control is in these trials. So these trials are now moving to the point where I think we're doing about 60 or 80 people in the real world using this system. It's a Dexcom sensor, a Roche pump, and a cell phone, and gearing up to probably do a multi-100-person trial in the very near future. Now, you're fortunate here in Seattle that we have some really amazing work going on. And this is Dr. Rick Mouseth. We have Dr. Greenbaum here at the Benaroya working on this team, and two Boeing engineers. And this is, again, often these folks come from a personal perspective. There's a personal diabetes connection here. And JDRF has been supporting this work for a number of years now. They use a very unique algorithm called fuzzy logic to do closed-loop control that was used in some of the Boeing flight control autopilot programming. And just to show you, again, the types of studies, they did these big, massive pizza meal, high carb, high fat challenges, a lot of exercise challenging. And again, you can talk to Dr. Greenbaum, and they'll be recruiting probably more trials, but you'll see a couple things. Time and target is great, and as they modify the algorithm, it keeps getting better. I mean, excellent time between 70 and 180 in these trials when doing pretty vigorous exercise. So the big question on the street right now is, well, should we jump to multi-hormone? And everybody thinks about this. They say, oh, you're using insulin, and the body normally uses insulin and glucagon. Shouldn't we be doing insulin and glucagon? So JDRF has been supporting a lot of insulin and glucagon work. This is a graph from the group in Boston who's doing insulin and glucagon and had a high visibility paper a few months ago in the New England Journal. We're funding some really excellent work on insulin and glucagon in Portland right now at Oregon Health and Sciences. So the analogy that's used here often, again, is insulin is the accelerator and glucagon is a brake. And we should do multi-hormone because who would drive a car without a brake? That would be crazy. You can't drive a car without a brake. And the challenge here with this analogy, and the challenge I see a little bit with glucagon and insulin, is it has to be done very, very carefully. Because when you're driving on, and I have to remember it's like I-5 here in Seattle, right? If you're driving on I-5 in Seattle, you expect when you press the brake, it's going to stop the car. So if you're driving on I-5 and I said, drive your car on I-5, the speed limit's 65, and you're driving your car, you're driving 65. If I said, okay, drive on I-5 and your brake, 1 out of 10 times you press it, it's not going to work. How fast would you drive? Probably pretty slowly, very carefully. So this group here, I think, actually drives a little too heavy on the accelerator and on the brake. And I think it sets up a risky scenario. And this is one of the graphs they published in their paper. And what you see here in the scenario that I worry a lot about is right here. This is a person whose blood sugar right after midnight was about 280. And the system not the person, auto-dosed insulin. And it dropped quite a bit, all the way down to just above 60. Now, on the surface here, it looks really good, because if you look at the data, the person's average over the 5 days in this trial was 118. And they barely got low, 2% of the time low, below 60. So on the surface, that sounds great. But here's my worry. See this? It goes down, and then from about, I don't know, that's about 2 a.m. to about 5:30 a.m., they hover right around 60. You look at this glucagon, so the red is the glucagon in this study. It's a lot of glucagon. I don't know, if you add it up, it may be about a half a rescue dose. And the pump is off for 5 hours, which is pretty unusual. So my problem here with glucagon and insulin and being careful about this is, how many people wear pumps in here or have kids with pumps? How many people have never had an occlusion in their pump? Never? You've never had an occlusion in your pump? Well, the data we have from, we've been funding some insulin set improvements, is pumps are not pumping the amount of insulin you think they are about 10% of the time. So this is a person who's asleep, and what happens if that glucagon cannula is kinked and that glucagon wasn't available to be pumped into the body? That, to me, is a risk for an overdose of insulin. So the group in Portland actually takes a very different approach, where they use about 80% less glucagon, and their algorithm is built to only use insulin. But the glucagon is there as a rescue. And that, so the point being here that on the surface, insulin and glucagon sounds logical and good. I do think it could play a very important role, but I think it needs to be done correctly. So just very quick to finish. Some of the other things that we're working on to make these systems better, we have a joint partnership with HELMSLEY. One of the big things out there, I mentioned sensor accuracy. People want more accurate sensors. The Dexcom sensor has made big advances. Medtronic is moving in a great direction. The PLGM system that's at FDA right now has a 2 generations ahead Medtronic sensor. We've been funding a next generation Medtronic sensor with HELMSLEY that they intend to have a complete replacement of finger sticking. So today's sensors are not perfect, we get that. But we are working on making better, smaller, easier to use sensors. Now, another pragmatic issue in glucagon is, everybody knows glucagon's a powder right now. One of the barriers to dual hormone glucagon, say we figure out the right way to do it, is we need a liquid glucagon that can go in pumps. So we're funding 3 different projects now on liquid glucagon. That's another area of focus of ours. Nobody wants to wear 2 pumps. So if it's a dual hormone approach, one other approach in dual hormone that I think is actually probably more promising than glucagon is insulin and Similan, or the hormone amylin. But either way you do it, nobody wants to wear 2 pumps. So we are funding a project with Tandem Diabetes where the pump would be capable of doing both. And you would have one infusion set that kind of bifurcated under the skin. So that's another obstacle we're trying to break down. The final and the #1 chink in artificial pancreas armor is insulin injected under the skin doesn't work fast enough. This is the bane of everybody with diabetes existence, is this graph. It looks technical, but if you look at the green, this light green, that's what the human body does when you don't have diabetes. It makes insulin before you even eat, and then makes more insulin when you're digesting your food. And this first burst of insulin, you can see, comes very, very quickly right into your bloodstream and right into your liver. And then the rest of the insulin also is delivered right into your bloodstream and liver, and it works really nicely and keeps your blood sugar between 70 and 105 most of the day, 99+%. Today's insulins that we use take about 60 to 75 minutes to peak action. And that everybody appreciates. That puts you behind the 8 ball when you're trying to time a meal and get that curve to match. So what that does is causes post-meal highs when you don't have this, and these tails of insulin that stick around in your body too long cause delayed lows. So everybody's experienced this. You test your kid or yourself at 9:30 in the morning and your blood sugar is 350 after you've had Frosted Flakes or something, and then you test yourself at 11:30 before lunch and you're 40. Well, I have one more slide here, I think. So one area that we've been focused on recently is faster-acting insulins. One just got approved. And this isn't a fully automated closed-loop system, but it may be an approach that's interesting. This is the inhaled insulin called Afrezza, or Technosphere. Just got approved by FDA a few months ago. Sanofi is partnering with the company who makes this called Mankind, and will launch this insulin in the spring, the early next year. It's not exactly clear, but probably in the winter or spring of next year. This insulin is pretty interesting to me because unlike our injectable insulin, this insulin peaks in about 12 to 14 minutes, and it clears in about 40 minutes. So it's very, very rapid acting. In closed loop studies, we've been doing closed loop at California, Santa Barbara, where people take a puff of the insulin as their mealtime, and then the pump just runs automatically all the time. So the pump does the basal, and you just have to deal with the meal. This insulin is actually indicated for after you eat because it works so quickly. So you would say, well, I want it to be totally automatic, but when you do these studies with this mealtime insulin like this, it actually works really, really well. And this is just a graph of, this is data that's not published, but, oh, one more. And you just see the post-meal spike with and without. Without is the pink and the blue is with the Afrezza. It just knocks down that post-meal spike. And if you can knock down that post-meal spike, the controller can do the basal rates really, really nicely. Well, so one of the, I'll finish with my taking off my scientist hat and putting my person with diabetes hat. And one of the things that I often say to families who come out to events like this is, the best thing that my parents did for my brother and me as we grew up was say that you'll do everything your friends do and more. That diabetes will add more work, it's going to be harder, you're going to have to pay attention, you're going to have to take care of yourselves, but you're not going to let it hold you back. And one of my big things, and you can see these pictures on Instagram if you look at Aaron J. Kowalski, is I run a lot with diabetes. And I ran up yesterday, and I think, you know, when I talk about being on the road and traveling a lot, instead of sitting in the hotel for an extra hour, I got out and ran up to Kerry Park, up on the hillside, where everybody takes the pictures of Mount Rainier and the Space Needle. And it's just a way to say that I've done 16 marathons, that diabetes is, everybody here knows how hard it is. But you can do amazing things, and your kids can do amazing things. And I've been fortunate this is my 30th year of having diabetes, to have no diabetes complications. My brother has some low issues. The CGM device has helped him tremendously, but 37 years of diabetes and no diabetes complications. And we will get to a cure. It's going to take some time, and these treatments, like an artificial pancreas, will help us be healthier and happier and live life easier until we get there. But folks like you are going to make it happen. You know, giving up a beautiful sunny day here on the weekend in Seattle and coming and listening to a lot of diabetes science talks is a huge commitment, and raising money and raising awareness is important. So I attribute my health and good mental well-being to folks like you who really keep us going. So I thank you for that.